Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Women Leading Boldly Summit. I am so happy to have Antoinette here today. Let me briefly introduce you to Antoinette Benoit. She is a Franco-Canadian, former chief marketing officer. She's got over 30 years experience in marketing and consumer research, including 10 years as a member of the executive board in multinationals in both France, Europe, and North America. She today is an independent consultant in brand strategy, and I'll include her contact information at the end. And the reason why I'm so thrilled to have her here today is that she is a diversity advocate, loves anything and everything that promotes women, and she was the one who co-founded McDonald's European Women's Leadership Network, where she mobilized a multicultural team to make diversity another essential lever for the company's growth. And today, I am thrilled that we are going to be talking about very topical subjects and especially new threats to women's advancement in the workplace. So, Antoinette, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to briefly add anything and introduce yourself further or add anything to that introduction?
I think you did it, and I'm just very happy to be here. So thanks a lot for creating this opportunity to discuss that, because I think it's a critical topic.
Okay, great. So thank you also, and let's dive in. So my first question is, today, so I know that you have such a passion for this topic, but tell us why, what are the new threats to women's advancement in the workplace today, and why are you so passionate about this topic?
Okay, so I think that in the last 15 years or so, we've made lots of progress on this topic of diversity. Companies have embraced it. We have seen multiple women's networks created in companies that have been dealing with building the awareness, the acknowledgement that there was a problem. They have been talking about new words like glass ceiling, salary gap, work-life balance, which was something we were not discussing before, because when I started my career, there was no notion of work-life balance. We saw very new kinds of role models coming up. We saw female role models, which so far we didn't have so many of them. If you think of Marie Curie, probably, but we didn't know her really well. If you think of Kamala Harris, AOC, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand during the COVID crisis, I'm sure you remember her. And we even saw some new kinds of male leadership, male role models, such as, of course, Justin Trudeau in Canada, or Sanchez in Spain. I don't know if you saw a few days ago the speech of Justin Trudeau, maybe because I'm Canadian too now, so I was more sensitive, but there was this speech from Justin Trudeau 3 days ago announcing very strong retaliation measures to the tariffs that Trump had just announced. And he gave this very powerful speech in a super calm, uniting, moving way that put all the Canadians behind him. And it was just so different from the style of the guy on the other side of the border. And by the way, we learned today that the other guy on the other side of the border is for the moment giving up on the tariffs. So it was a really interesting episode. So at the end of the day, after about 15 years of this great movement, of course the numbers are not where they should be. We know that, broadly speaking, in the world, only 10% of the CEO are women, 8 to 10% Europe, US. And if you just speak about France, I was reading the other way that less than half of French employees think that their company does enough in terms of its inclusion. And when it comes to ethnic diversity, it's even more difficult. Like 3/4 of the company do not integrate any French ethnic or cultural diversity today in their exec. But we made some progress. That it depends how you look at the glass, half empty, half full.
Well, let's look at it half full for the time being, because I agree that there's so much that still needs to be done. But where do you think is the half full part? Like, what are some of the good initiatives that have been made and that you've also been a part of? Where do you think that the needle has moved a little bit in what you and I would consider the right direction?
I think it's a great question. I think the biggest point is that things have moved. I think the biggest thing is that now it's a topic. Now we discuss it. Like 30 years ago when I started working, there was no discussion about this topic. The world was the way it was, and there was no discussion about changing the corporate world. So the first thing is now it's on the agenda, and now it's considered as a business driver. There's no discussion about that. All the McKinsey reports, they have showed again and again that diversity, ethnic and gender diversity, brings more profitability to companies. And there was this moment, super interesting last week, when 2 weeks ago now, because so much has been happening in the last 2 weeks, I don't even know when it was, when Trump announced that not only the federal organizations, but also all the companies, all corporations had to give up on DEI. And some companies immediately started to remove DEI from their website, calling it like in a different way. But some companies said, no way, we are not moving back. And Costco was one of those. The Costco shareholders voted that they would continue their DEI program. They would not change a comma. And I think that was a really, really interesting moment. And you saw this in the numbers. Like France is a bit different probably because with the Loi Rixin from 2021, that imposed like some quotas and indicators for pay gap, we are probably in advance. We are ahead in Europe. And now I think we're not very far from the 30% target that they put for 2026, in terms of percentage of women on the exec of the largest companies. We know that more than 2/3 of French employees believe that their company is committed to diversity and inclusion. And even the number of executives from ethnic diversity has increased. And it has also increased a little bit in the US from the last numbers I was saying, even if some people now say that it's already going back in 2024 in the US. So I think broadly speaking, even if many of us have the feeling that this progress is too slow, at least so far, this progress sounded irreversible. And I think the big question now is what, and that's not only on this topic, I think it's on many, many topics at the moment. What if progress was not irreversible? And that's where I think today we are facing a perfect storm of political and societal challenges that threaten to undo the progress. And I think we have been seeing that in the last 2 weeks in the US in a very massive and even shocking way.
And so why do you think it's so urgent that people step up, both men and women, and that all of this progress that we've made, even if it's not as much as we would like, there has been progress made, as you said. Tell us a little bit, in your opinion, why is it so urgent? If there was one or two things that concretely suggest that we should take action now or do something differently, why is today, as we're recording this beginning of February, why is this the topic urgent?
I think what has been happening in the US in the last 3 weeks and has been it's not just in the last 3 weeks, it has been coming slowly but surely, but it's just a kind of explosion now. But I think it hides very different things that have been happening behind the scene for some time now. I think the first one is the rise of toxic leadership as a global trend. There has been a normalization of authoritarian, arbitrary leadership in politics, often celebrated as strong leadership. And many US observers, for example, recently commented that for those toxic leaders, cruelty is the point.
So it's cruelty is the
cruelty.
point.
Toxic leadership that becomes a cruel leadership. I'm sure you're thinking of the same thing that I'm thinking of at the moment, but for foreigners in the US. And the second thing is that there's starting to be a misrepresentation of diversity initiatives, positioned as favoritism. I love this one. And this has fueled resentment with a simple word like woke becoming a bad word. And as we said earlier, we are seeing very, very concretely now in the US, the very recent executive orders to dismantle DEI programs, federal and corporate.
Mm.
The third thing I think which is really interesting is the tech industry. With those tech industry leaders that were celebrated as amazing, progressive people like 10 years ago, and that who are explaining now that, like Zuckerberg, the workplace needs to man up. Yeah. This one, I just like in a world where 80% of the CEO positions are held by men, how could you say that this workplace needs to man up and the need for masculine energy? That was, okay, I think lots of people would say that was not surprising from Zuckerberg because of how he created Facebook and so on. But still, and I think it's particularly noteworthy in a world where the tech industry was long seen as supposedly one of the most progressive and appealing sectors. Not racist, like with lots of great values opposed to racism. And I think that the results of all that is that in many democratic countries, even in Europe, there's a growing resistance from young men to diversity and to what we would call progress, and that they see as regression. And maybe, I'm sure you saw the last numbers in France, for example, from the High Council for Equality. I noted it, they said a quarter of men, more than a quarter, like 28% of men aged 25 to 35 think that men are better suited to be bosses. Like it's in their genes. And the perceived difficulty of being a man in current society has increased by 19 points among the youngest, like 15 to 24. And it's super important because those young men, they are future junior colleagues. They're the people some people are going to coach tomorrow, or not to coach, I don't know. Maybe it would be better for them to be coached. And they are the current teammates of our kids. Like if my son, who is 22, was tomorrow to tell me, I'm more suited than you to be a boss. So of course he won't say that because it doesn't mean it. So he has been brought up in a very different world where everybody has their space and deserve to be.
And Antoinette, just one question, because you mentioned, rise in toxic leadership, cruelty is a big kind of as the next, I almost want to say the next generation of toxic leadership, and the example of tech industry leaders. Do you feel that also those trends, you also see them in Europe? Are they more present in North America? Do you think they'll come to Europe? Just kind of what is your observation and maybe your personal experience also? Have you had those types of situations in your life, or do you think it's something really recent? So that was a very big question. Maybe the first part is, do you see it coming to Europe is the first part of the question.
I'll try to answer it. I think that the numbers from the High Council for Equality show that it's already there. Like this idea that for white men, the life is tougher now in a world and in the country still dominated by white men, shows that there's a feeling that is already here. I don't know that behaviors are here. The funny thing is that 20 years or 15 years ago, this move around DEI was coming from the US. Like, at McDonald's, the first time we heard about this, because nobody knew about that in France, they had to ask a woman from McDonald's US, she was great, come to Europe to explain to us what gender diversity initiatives were about, because we had never heard about it. Like, it was just new. So I think it came from the US. And I think the dangers could also come from the US. I'm not a sociologist, but we all know that lots of trends come from the US and that they come faster and faster now. So I'm not trying to scare people and say we are here. But in the last 10 years, we have seen so many things coming from the US and more fast in the media world, for example. Like today, there are less and less media able to counter those regressive approaches. More and more on TV, you're going to see journalists letting things be said that are crazy. So I think if we're not super careful, I think it will be coming anyway. So I think we have to be, and I don't know if it will be coming the same way, but more and more today, we let even politicians say crazy things.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the parallel that I see is up until now, it's been in politics, or it's been more in politics where there's you start having people say things and do things that they wouldn't have done before or that were not acceptable or disrespectful. And the politicians who have, and it's not just in the US, it's, I mean, if we look at South America, there's been a lot of also things that have gone on. There are European leaders, but I think that when they give people, in air quotes here, permission to act a certain way because they act a certain way, they're opening the way or the path for other people. And now it's rolled over into the corporate world. Yep. Whereas I feel before the corporate world was was in their own lane. Of course, they had to work together, but they were in their own lane. And now, if we look at just what's happened, things have become blurred very, very quickly. Yeah. Would you agree, or do you have a different opinion on that?
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I completely agree. And I have two things in my mind. One is the way, well, if you think of Macron coming in 2017, explaining that in a way that the country should be managed the way you manage a company, I think this completely supports your point. And I'm also thinking it's crazy to see how a country like Spain, how well this country is going at the moment, like high growth rates with a totally different kind of leadership, completely inclusive leadership, and the country is just doing so well. And we have just two examples at the moment that are just so close geographically. And you cannot say that Spain was traditionally a super progressive country for women.
Yeah.
It was not. So you can just see how, I think to me, and I experienced that in Canada already, it's to which extent a leader can influence the culture in the country. We see more and more that leaders have many less ways to control the economy, obviously, because it's totally intertwined. But leaders still have this amazing power to influence culture. And when I was in Canada for like 8 years, it was amazing to see how Trudeau was creating a much more inclusive feeling for everyone, a much more progressive culture. And between 4 years, 2016, 2020, we are seeing the exact opposite in the US. It was just whatever you think about his politics, I think that's the point. Whatever you think about his politics, I think he was a very decent leader and a kind of a role model for many in the way he did behave.
And so what do you think what can women do? Like, this is also the objective of this conversation and this summit is that there are so many amazing women in the world working every single day to defend, support, help change the world. How do you think, what can we do as women to ensure that things from our point of view aren't moving backwards?
Yeah. But I think that there are a lot of great women and there are a lot of great men, and probably they need to work together. And I think they need to work together to really reframe the case for something we already said a few times here. They need to reframe the case for inclusive leadership. So first, of course, but it's always better to say it, we need to keep championing diversity. Like, there's no question about posing or being intimidated and thinking, maybe we need a different model. No way. I think we need to keep championing diversity, and to keep championing diversity as a broader initiative, not limited to women's advancement, because it's a moral imperative to advocate for all. And because it's a business imperative, because again, there are multiple reports about the positive impact of ethnic and gender diversity on profitability. And that's also what people expect. I was taking this other number the other day. 86% of French people consider that corporations should play a role in advancing social progress. That's interesting, which reminds me of the Costco guys saying, no way, diversity, DEI is part of who we are. That's our customer base, and that makes our profitability at the end of the day. So I think we need to keep making the business case and keep outlining the risk for business of going backwards. That's exactly what the Costco shareholders did. And two, I think that more women and more senior executive women need to join forces with other prominent male leaders and female leaders to create a much more unified, powerful voice in favor of diversity and inclusive leadership, both within their company and outside of it. I think it's really time to be very, very vocal together.
Okay. And how, like, concretely, if listeners could come away from this conversation with something that they could do, actions that they could take today, what are some actions that you would recommend?
When I was preparing this, I was thinking of 3 things. I'm sure there are many others, but 3 maybe that I'm more sensitive to, I've been more sensitive to in my career. I think it's really grounded in my personal corporate experience. I see 3 things. The first thing is we need to reframe allyship by countering this feeling that diversity and inclusive leadership happen at the expense of the majority groups. I think we cannot let this story continue to expand because it's just not true. So we need to demonstrate that inclusive leadership benefits most men just as it benefits most women. And more broadly, inclusive leadership benefits majority group as much as it benefits minority group. And it's not complex to understand it. And again, that's really, tell me if you did not experience that in your career, but inclusive leadership challenges bias, challenges these stereotypes that keep many men from being successful. Just like women are often stereotyped as being less assertive, blah, 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 risk adverse, blah, blah, blah. Men face pressure to conform to traditional masculine traits, such as being naturally a leader, an emotional, blah, 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 blah. But many men were raised in families or cultures that emphasize very different traits: humility, care, listening, which are traditionally seen as female traits. And we all know now there are no female traits. There are such things as female traits or men traits. We are just each other's a mix of different kinds of traits.
Yeah.
And many introvert men will fail today in a traditionally male authoritarian leadership model, but they will thrive in an inclusive environment where you can be yourself and lead without having to be loud and autocratic. And I experienced that so many times in my career. And it's when I started to talk to men about that they really started to engage in the topic. The same way inclusive leadership increases everyone's satisfaction at work, because by enabling empathy and mutual understanding, you favor relationships, and those relationships, they enable more collaborative and interesting ways of working. So men benefit from this too. Yeah. And I could give, so inclusive leadership fosters a more balanced approach to workplace policies and practices, such as parental leave, flexible hours. Men benefit from this too. So at the end of the day, inclusive leadership drives everyone's engagement and retention and performance. And white men benefit from this too. So there's no way inclusive leadership benefits everyone.
Yeah, but I think there is a level of and on a certain level, I think we're talking about change, we're talking about evolution, and people are generally just scared. When scared of the unknown, scared of losing power, or scared of, maybe they're not seeing the benefits yet. They don't understand what's going to happen. They're going to lose their comfort. You have to go through a little bit of discomfort to see the growth. And so I think that there's probably some underlying fear. My personal experience is that because I have a lot of nieces who are actually married, and those men, I see the new generations seeing things differently. Even if, and I agree that the numbers are still, and the numbers that you quoted earlier are scary, I'm hoping that men do start to see the benefits, all of those benefits that you just said in the workplace. So the fact that they don't see them today or don't want to see them or are just scared, I think for me, that's also an educational point to help just communicate, over communicate, so that they also understand what the benefits are for them? Because I think today a lot of it is just fear.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And it comes back to what you said earlier. It's fear. And in this feeling of fear, they start to hear some other conversations that let them think, I'm scared for a real reason. But they don't understand they are scared for a bad reason.
Yeah.
But they think now that there's a legitimate reason
to
be scared.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. So we need to counter this. And I think we need to need to explain. We always need to dialogue and show them. And to me, that brings me to my third point on the things I think we should be doing, which is to reconsider how we approach leadership by questioning, it might be a bit controversial, but questioning the emphasis we placed so far on women's leadership development. Like
okay, what do you mean by that? Yeah, tell me a little bit about it.
I think we need to stop thinking that women need more training than men. As if men were natural leaders and natural learners. I think it's very, very annoying. It has always really annoyed me. I have always benefited from lots of training and I've loved it. But I don't see why men should not be trained as much as women. I think we need to train and develop inclusive leadership skills in both women and men. I think we need to do it much earlier in their career. I think in many places, we wait until employees take on management roles to begin developing their leadership skills. You know, like the new manager training. I did it, I remember. Yeah. It's already too late. Like, it's already not too late, but super late. Because it's so weird because leadership is not tied to a title. I think that's also the big change in the paradigm here. It's a set of behaviors and skills, leadership, that should be nurtured right from the start and throughout your career. It's not something you were born with. So I think we need to train everyone. We need to train them early. And I also think that we need to promote cross-gender, cross-ethnicities, training, mentoring, and sponsorship. I think we need to which doesn't mean you cannot also have a not non-cross-gender or non-cross-ethnicities thing, but I think we need also to make sure that we train all those people together, we mentor them together, we sponsor them in a diverse way, because I think we need to leverage any opportunities to have diverse people learn together in order to learn about and from each other. Because that's where you have dialogue. It's where you train people, when you mentor people, that when you sponsor people, that you have dialogue in a company, in a corporation. The rest of the time you work.
And so because I think that there's still a lot of companies that have done nothing on this topic. Not even, and this is not even a basic awareness campaign or having speakers. I think there's so many places that still, and I'm speaking specifically in Europe, I don't know what it's like in the US, but when I see the companies that I've been exposed to in Europe, there's still so much education, I think, that needs to be done, and awareness, I would call it awareness. If a manager is listening to this, or, a VP, what is one thing do you think that they could go and do? Is there a place where they could start? Is it to follow somebody online who is, an expert? Are there books out there? Like, how could an individual start at the most basic level to learn and create awareness around this topic? Should they go to their HR? Should they start a discussion group? Do you have any thoughts on, at the most basic level, what somebody could do?
Well, I think that's a great question. It's a tough question too. Yes. I've been in big companies, so I never had really the problem. I think if I were in this situation, I would probably go first to HR to try to understand where they are on this topic. Also, depending on what I see around me in the company. Like, is the CEO showing the way or not at all? Is it an environment which is already doing things, because this company has always been doing it in a natural way, which I think is not giving your question. But I would try to first understand where I am and what the environment is about. Is it something that clearly the CEO is not embodying this at all? And just showing the opposite. I was just questioning my capacity to change things. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit pessimistic on that, but I think you can't do anything alone. What I would say depends also on your position. Just an example. I think if you're in the marketing team, for example, and you do regularly consumer research, and you're the one who's going to dig deeper into consumer insights, then what I would recommend to do is what we had the opportunity to do at McDonald's, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, when we co-founded this Women's Leadership Network. I was with Florence Netzler. You know her well. She was the head of Consumer and Business Insight for Europe. She was an amazing insights expert, and she's still. And what she said, Antoinette, we're going to do research. And we did. We had someone at a great research company, and she did 30 interviews with women and a few men at different levels in the company and in different countries. And those 30 interviews were amazing. What came from it, because you had so many people saying, but we don't need to do diversity, everything is okay, there's no problem, let's just focus on business. And in the interviews, we were able to really reveal what people were thinking. And so many people, most of those women, they were saying, there's a problem, even if in such an open company and with a great culture, there are still things we need to do. And the funny thing is that when I went to Canada, I really motivated the Women's Network of Men's Canada to do the same kind of research. And the results were very different. There were still problems. There were still issues. They were just not the same issues. So it was very interesting. Same company, different countries. There were still lots of things to do that were really important to people and that would really improve the way people at the end of the day work.
And is that is it linked to company culture in those countries? Is it linked to the culture in those countries? Like, why do you think it was so different? Or maybe because there were many years apart between those two experiences, had things evolved? Like, why would you say that there would have been differences?
Well, I think to your point, I think Canada was ahead of France on those diversity, societal issues. They were clearly ahead on many different things. Gay wedding, gay marriage had been adopted much more several years before France. This topic of diversity, they were much, much ahead. The topic was much more about work-life balance, having kids, men and women, like being a parent and being the kid of your aging parents. There were other things. Another example was in Canada, there were a lot of people from different cultures. Toronto, 50% of the people were not born in Canada. So there were people from very different cultural backgrounds. They would not necessarily feel comfortable in the leadership culture. Not every day, not always. Like, I had some people, they were much more introvert. You would have to listen to them even if they don't shout. You need as a leader to learn to listen to people even if they are not loud, because it doesn't mean they are not interesting. But that's subtle. No, but that's really the everyday life of a corporation. So just that, those are a few examples. But I think researching this topic of diversity is key, because if you do that, and that's my last point, I was just thinking that we are at a point where we have all those young generations coming to work. And we know that young people today, they are very much focused on authenticity, transparency, empowerment, social responsibility. That's particularly dear to them. And you're also all those young guys who think that they are unfairly treated. So that's not an homogeneous generation. And I think it's really interesting to understand how they articulate their expectations of leadership when joining the corporate world. And I think that one of the key things today if we want to strengthen the engagement now and prepare the future, we need to understand what inclusive leadership means to this younger generation. It's super important. And there are not, again, 10 ways to do that. I think we need to research it the same way we research any critical business topics. So you need to be data-driven, you need to be customer-focused, and you need to go after the insight. You need to engage not only your HR department, to our point earlier, but also your insights team, even if there's only one person, or your marketing guy, and your best research agency. And you need to go gather deep insights into your younger employees across different genders, ethnicities, and roles in order to understand how they perceive diversity and leadership within the organization and how they feel about it and what could be done. And I think that's the only way to truly understand what is at stake, what you're facing, to identify solutions, to address resistance with empathy and without confrontation, and to foster alignment and engagement. To our other points earlier, how do we do with those young men who think they are not heard any longer? We need to dialogue, we need to listen, and we need to understand why they are where they are and how we're going to bring them on the boat.
Yeah, I think that, so fully agree with your point about you need some kind of starting point within companies, some kind of starting point. One of my positions, what we had done is same thing. We had started off with some kind of research, internal research, and then we actually let the younger generation spearhead also and just be at the initiative of creating more awareness, of speaking, of bringing in speakers that they wanted to see and hear about. And I think what worked so well is that also there were men and women doing that. It wasn't driven by the women, even though I think some women felt a little bit more strongly about it. There were so many men that were curious. And so I think it just goes to also to your point that we need to bring them along, that it has to be, because I do think that we probably swung quite far in one direction at one point where it was like women were taking on everything. But I think we can't, when I say taking on everything, they're spearheading these initiatives. But I think it has to be today. If we want something sustainable, like deep change, has to be both men and women. So,
I agree.
Yeah, no, fully agree with your points. And maybe just to just curious about also what you put into place with the European Women's Network at McDonald's. Was there one either best practice or key idea or something that worked really well that you would love to see? I mean, we talked about the research, we talked about learning from like the starting point, but was there a different initiative or something that you tried that you were like, wow, that was really interesting, it was very impactful, something that you would like to share with the listeners?
It's not one size fits all, especially when you work on a network, which is in, more than 30 countries. The fact that we did this research helped us first gain support from the executive team. They were completely aligned behind it. And thanks to the research, we were able to build a business plan. Then we wrote a strategy for diversity at McDonald's. We wrote a strategy. And we were a team, including women from like 7 or 8 different markets. So we were able to have different kinds of perspectives. Being a woman in France, or being in Paris, or being a woman in Munich, for working for McDonald's Germany, in the south of Germany, where people believe that when a woman has a kid, she should stop working to take care of the kid. It's very different. So it cannot be one size fits all.
Yeah.
But we established a strategy with a frame, like a framework. And then we encourage the markets to take it and to adapt it. What we did in parallel, which I think was very instrumental, was that we started to share best practice. Like we gather best practices from all the markets, including obviously the Nordics markets, who were more ahead of us. That was interesting. And we're able to share all those best practices with all the markets. And then all the markets had to include in their business plan, their strategy, like their own what they were going to do on this topic.
Okay.
The thing I could add on what I think worked really well is, and it was a big shift, like the first time we heard about Women Leadership Network, it was because McDonald's had gathered about 40 women from all the European markets, mid to top management, for their first ULN meeting with these women coming from the US, as I said earlier, because we had never heard about it. And at the end of the day, they said, okay, who wants to go next? And that's how we really co-founded the network and took it. And we transformed this meeting, which was like 40 women, into a 150 people meeting with women and men and all the managing directors attending. This was, I think, the big, with the support of the exec. I was member of the exec and I had the support of the exec. That was the big change. It comes back to what you said earlier. Like, we could not do it together. We needed allies, and we need the men to be the allies.
Yeah.
We needed to be together in this. And when you start explaining to a male CEO, male CEO, that inclusive leadership benefits everyone, a few say, and others say, yeah, I know it because I suffered from that. And suddenly you find lots of allies. So I think allyship, to me, knowing your topic, understanding what is already really well done in the company, sharing it, and then creating allyship so that men are on board with you. I think for us, that were the three elements of success.
Yeah. But what I hear also is that you have somebody passionate about the topic who wants to spearhead it and wants to move it forward and is so the buy-in definitely. But I think you have somebody who spearheads it, but also has created other women and men that want to also move the subject forward. Because it's also something I hear is that some companies, they want to do it, they know it's important, but it's never top of the agenda. It's kind of like when you have time, and I think that making it an important agenda item is going to help move the needle faster, but you need somebody to spearhead it. So
and we are doing it on top of our job.
Yeah,
it's true.
Of course.
But it's also because we had a job that I think we were able to bring an interesting perspective to the table.
Yeah.
Now, after a while, we're starting to have some DEI expert, and that was amazing. But first, you're right. We started with our business knowledge, our business influence, because people knew us, and our passion.
Okay. All right. Is there anything that we have maybe not touched upon that you wanted to mention? Did we cover all key topics for you? I wanted to give you the opportunity to give some closing remarks on the topic because it's such an important topic. And I think we could go on forever on the different subjects. But is there anything that I missed?
No, I think you're a great interviewer and you made great points for us. And I think it's a topic that also illustrates something bigger, which is what you lost once you lost it.
Yeah.
This is really at risk. It's part of something bigger, which is at risk, on which we cannot necessarily always act except by voting in a way that, promote freedom and democracy. This is also what we can do more specifically in the corporations, because we know that consumers, like people in general, they want corporations to play a role in this everywhere on the planet, not only in Europe, but also like the US and other countries. So it's our role to do something. And I think, again, what you lost once you lost it. So if we don't want to lose it, we have to really, really, really take care of it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Tell also our listeners exactly where can we find you and what you do and who you help today. And I'll also link it in the show notes.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
It was really interesting.
Is there any can we find you also? Just tell us, who do you help today? Can we find it on LinkedIn? But tell us a little bit in just 2 minutes if somebody wanted to work with you or contact you, like who do you work with today?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's super easy. You can contact me. I like to help people succeed. So I've been doing that as an executive for many years. Now I decided to do it in a different way, being an external resource with the capacity to look at things differently, but still helping people succeed. So if you are, a new CMO, upcoming CMO, and you want to get some support in working a new environment, working with an executive committee, delivering a strong business and marketing plan, understanding what you should do with your brand, I'm there.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. Antoinette, thank you so much. I will link all of our information. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Until next time.
Bye-bye.